The great ship Valiant Dawn hung above the broken moon of Resar 4, surrounded by drifting rocks and pieces of old war machines. Its crew waited in silence as a massive alien vessel slowly descended from orbit, shining like a silver blade against the darkness. Everyone on board could feel the tension. The Cathari Empire was the most feared force in the galaxy, cold, proud, and merciless. When their message arrived, there was no question of refusing it. They said they were coming to deliver the Punished One. No one knew what that meant. But Captain Elias Ward stood firm at the command deck, his hands tight behind his back, his face calm though his heart pounded. The humans had already faced the Cathari once and barely survived. Now the Empire was here again, and they carried with them something that could change everything. When the alien ship docked, the airlock opened with a hiss and the humans saw them, tall, graceful beings covered in long silver robes that shimmered like water. Their eyes glowed faintly white, and their expressions were full of disgust as they stepped onto the human deck, as if even breathing human air was beneath them. Between two of these beings stood a young woman unlike any the crew had ever seen. Her skin was a pale blue color, her hair silver and soft like starlight. A strange glowing mark had been burned into her forehead, a spiral that pulsed faintly. Her hands were bound by light cuffs, though she didn't fight. Her expression was blank, her gaze cold, yet there was a sadness in her eyes that not even the Cathari arrogance could hide. She was the one they called the Punished One. The leader of the Cathari stepped forward, his voice smooth but full of contempt. "This," he said, motioning to the girl, "is Princess Ziravel of the High Clans. She has defied her emperor, and her punishment is to live among humans. She will serve one of your lowest." His words were like poison meant to insult. The humans exchanged confused looks. They couldn't believe a princess of such a mighty empire was being handed over to them like a piece of trash. Captain Ward's voice was steady when he asked, "Who will she serve?" The Cathari smiled cruelly. "A janitor, a cleaner. It suits her well." There was silence in the docking bay. Then from the back of the human crowd, a man stepped forward. He wore a stained uniform, grease covering his sleeves, and his boots left faint marks on the floor. He wasn't a soldier or an officer. He was a maintenance worker named Jonas Hale, one of the quiet men who kept the ship running while others fought battles. He looked at the princess with curious eyes, not pitying, not afraid, just calm. Something about her lonely expression stirred something in him, something human. He spoke simply, "I'll take her." Everyone turned to stare at him. The Cathari envoy raised an eyebrow but said nothing more. The girl looked up at Jonas for the first time. For a moment, her silver eyes met his brown ones, and something small but real passed between them. Something neither of them understood yet. She was led away to begin her punishment, and the Cathari left without another word. The ship returned to the silence of space, but nothing felt the same anymore. Jonas didn't know why he had volunteered. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was compassion, maybe it was fate. But from that day on, the fate of a lonely human janitor and a broken alien princess became tied together in ways that would shake the stars. The days that followed were strange for both Jonas and Zira. The alien princess, who once lived surrounded by crystal halls and servants that bowed at every breath, now walked through the humming metal corridors of a human ship, carrying tools instead of jewels. The punishment had been meant to humiliate her, to make her understand the meaning of shame. The crew kept their distance from her, whispering when she passed. Some feared her power, others hated what she stood for. But Jonas treated her like any other worker. He handed her a mop, showed her how to clean a filter, how to fix a broken pipe, and how to check pressure valves. At first she refused to speak, glaring at him with cold silver eyes. She thought he was mocking her, but Jonas never raised his voice or laughed at her. He spoke softly, explaining things with patience, even when she ignored him completely. Each day, she worked in silence while the ship drifted between stations, carrying supplies and refugees from the ongoing conflicts. She didn't understand humans, their laughter, their small talk, their habit of helping one another without reason. To her, strength and power had always been the only things that mattered. Yet these fragile beings, short-lived and plain, kept the vastness of space running through sheer will. Jonas, with his rough hands and warm grin, puzzled her the most. He would share his food with her, offering her small squares of chocolate or sips of hot coffee. She found the taste bitter, but it fascinated her. Once, she asked him why he worked so hard when no one seemed to notice. He shrugged and said, "Someone has to keep things from breaking. If I don't, who will?" It was such a simple answer, yet it stayed with her long after. One day, a sudden explosion shook the lower decks. The warning alarms screamed through the ship and smoke filled the corridors. The reactor had gone unstable after a faulty coolant line burst. Crew members ran for emergency controls, but it was too late. The reactor was seconds from overloading. Jonas tried to reach the control panel, but a blast of heat knocked him back. Jira watched as he struggled to his feet, coughing, refusing to run. Something inside her shifted. Without thinking, she rushed forward, glowing light spreading from her hands as she absorbed the radiation waves. Her alien energy wrapped around the core, stabilizing it like a heartbeat returning to rhythm. When the alarms finally stopped, the room fell silent except for the sound of her heavy breathing. The crew stared in awe. Jonas stepped closer, wiping the soot from his face, and smiled at her. "You just saved the ship," he said. His voice was soft, but his eyes were bright with pride. "Guess that makes you one of us." For the first time since her exile, Zira didn't know what to say. Her people had always looked down on humans, calling them crude and unworthy. But this man, this janitor, looked at her not as a tool or a princess, but as a person. That night, as she sat by the viewport and watched the stars pass like slow rivers of light, she thought about what he said. Maybe punishment didn't always have to be pain. Maybe it could also be a chance to start again. For the first time in her life, she wondered what it meant to belong, not to a throne, not to an empire, but to something simple and real. And though she didn't know it yet, that small spark of warmth she felt growing in her heart would soon change the fate of two worlds. The peace that had slowly settled aboard the Valiant Dawn did not last long. Far away on the golden world of the Cathari throne, the Emperor learned that his daughter, the exiled princess, had begun to live like one of the humans. When his spies told him that she worked among them, ate with them, and even helped them in their ship, his fury shook the crystal towers of his palace. To him, it was the greatest insult imaginable, a royal heir, tainted by the dirt-born species his empire had always despised. In a single moment of rage, he sent an order that echoed across the galaxy. "If the humans have softened her, burn their world." The Cathari fleet, vast and shining, rose from their homeworld like a storm of silver blades, sweeping toward the human colonies that lay scattered across the stars. The first attack came without warning. Mars, proud and red under its domes, was turned into a wasteland of glass. The colony cities burned in silence as their atmosphere cracked. Then the fleet moved on to Europa, where orbital stations were torn apart like paper toys. The humans tried to fight back, but the Cathari ships were faster, stronger, and armed with weapons that could split moons. The stars themselves seemed to tremble as one human fleet after another was destroyed. Across the channels of deep space communication, cries for help echoed from one colony to the next. The war that no one wanted had begun, and the enemy was beyond mercy. On the Valiant Dawn, the crew gathered in the command center, faces pale as they watched the destruction unfold on the holoscreens. Captain Ward stood tall, his voice steady despite the fear around him. "They're coming for us next," he said. "Ready all weapons. We hold the line." The crew moved at once, fueled by that quiet, desperate courage that humans always seemed to find when the universe turned against them. Jonas was down in engineering, his hands moving fast over the controls, trying to reinforce the power lines. Jira stood beside him, her eyes wide with guilt. She knew this war was because of her. "They'll destroy you because of me," she whispered, her voice shaking. Jonas turned toward her, his face streaked with sweat and dust, but his eyes were calm. "Then they'll have to go through all of us," he said firmly. "We don't run from monsters." Something in his tone struck her heart harder than any weapon. She had seen entire races bow to her father's fleet, but never had she seen such bravery in anyone so small. Humans didn't have the power of the Cathari, yet they fought like fire, refusing to die. When the Cathari ships arrived over Titan's orbit, the battle began. The dark space around the planet erupted in streaks of light. Human fighters darted through the enemy's fire like flashes of steel, using speed and cunning instead of brute strength. The Cathari warships unleashed burning waves of plasma, but the humans moved unpredictably, diving between asteroids and hiding in the planet's shadow. The Valiant Dawn joined the fight, firing its railguns in steady rhythm, its hull trembling from each blast. Jonas and Zero worked side by side, patching power lines, rerouting shields, and keeping the ship alive while chaos raged outside. Through the viewing window, Zero watched the humans fight. They were outnumbered, their ships breaking apart one after another, but they never stopped. Even in the face of death, they fought harder, refused to surrender, and screamed defiance into the endless dark. For the first time, Zira understood why humans were feared, not for their strength but for their hearts. They didn't bow to fate, they changed it. As the battle burned on, she felt something inside her awaken, something fierce and bright. The Cathari could destroy planets, but they would never destroy what she saw in Jonas and his people, the will to live free. And in that moment, she made a silent promise, to stand with them no matter the cost. As the fires of war spread across the solar system, the humans prepared for another attack. The valiant Dawn drifted in the dark between the shattered remains of old ships, its crew exhausted but unbroken. Jira sat alone in the maintenance bay, her hands trembling as faint blue light pulsed beneath her skin. For days she had been hiding a truth she could no longer keep buried. When Jonas found her sitting by the flickering lights, she looked at him with fear in her eyes. "There is something you must know," she said quietly. Her voice was thin, shaking with shame. Jonas crouched beside her, his eyes gentle. "Whatever it is, we'll handle it," he said. She shook her head. "You don't understand. I am not just the Emperor's daughter. Inside me there is a weapon." She explained how at birth her father had placed something inside her, a living core made from ancient Cathari energy. It was meant to ensure her loyalty, a device that connected her life to the Empire's power. The core could bend energy, reshape matter, and even destroy a planet if unleashed. "If they capture me," she said, her voice breaking, "they will take the core and use it to burn Earth." Jonas stared at her in silence for a moment, his mind racing. The idea that such a weapon existed inside her was terrifying, but he didn't step back. Instead, he reached out, taking her trembling hands in his. "Then we make sure they never get the chance," he said. Together, they began to work. Jonas gathered the ship's engineers and scientists, though only a few knew the full truth. Using Zira's knowledge of Cathari technology and his understanding of human machines, they started building something that had never existed before. A weapon that combined both their worlds. It was risky, unstable, and could destroy them if it failed, but it was their only hope. The crew worked day and night, welding, programming, and testing, while outside the ship, human and alien fleets continued to clash. Jira spent hours channeling her power into the weapon, her skin glowing brighter each time until she could hardly stand. Jonas tried to make her rest, but she refused. "If I stop, more people will die," she said. He could see her pain, but he also saw her strength, a fire that matched the courage of any human soldier. When the sensors finally picked up the enemy's approach, the crew knew their time was up. The Cathari fleet was larger than anything they had faced, led by a massive flagship that blocked out the stars. The valiant Dawn moved into position, every system pushed to the limit. "All hands to battle stations," Captain Ward ordered. The ship shook as enemy fire rained down, blue plasma cutting through the void. Jira and Jonas were in the weapon bay, surrounded by flashing lights and the hum of power. The cannon they had built was ready, but it needed her to activate it. Jonas stood by the control console, his heart pounding as she stepped forward, her eyes glowing like twin stars. "Are you sure?" he asked. She gave a faint smile. "For once, yes." Jira placed her hands on the weapon's core, and her energy flowed into it like a river of light. The whole ship lit up, the walls humming with power. She cried out as the energy tore through her, but she kept going. Jonas shouted her name, but she didn't stop. Then in a flash brighter than the sun, the cannon fired. A beam of pure blue energy ripped through space, striking the Cathari flagship straight through its heart. The explosion spread like a storm, tearing ships apart, scattering the fleet into chaos. When the light faded, the humans cheered, but Jonas turned and saw Zira collapse, her glow fading. He caught her before she hit the floor, whispering her name as the ship drifted in silence. Around them, the stars burned bright, witnesses to a battle that would be remembered for generations. The battle that followed the destruction of the Cathari flagship was fierce beyond imagination. Though the humans had struck a powerful blow, the war was far from over. The death of one fleet only enraged the Cathari Emperor more. His pride had been wounded, and in his fury, he decided to end humanity once and for all. From the core of his empire, he rose in his personal warship, a vessel the size of a city, armed with weapons capable of turning entire worlds to dust. His arrival darkened the skies of Earth's colonies. Every star seemed to tremble as the Emperor's voice echoed across the human communication networks. Deep and merciless, "Return my daughter, or I will erase your kind from existence." The humans did not answer. The silence that followed was not fear, but defiance. On the valiant Dawn, Jonas stood in the command center beside Captain Ward, his face tired yet steady. Jira lay unconscious in the med bay, her strength nearly gone after saving them. Jonas's heart ached every time he looked at her, but he refused to give up. "He's not taking her," he said. "Not while we're breathing." The Emperor wasted no time. His ship entered the system, blotting out the light as it appeared above Titan. The humans fired first, knowing they could not win but choosing to fight anyway. Every ship in the fleet joined the battle, from small fighters to massive carriers. The sky turned into a storm of light and fire. Lasers and plasma beams crossed the void like burning rivers. Human ships moved in swarms, fast and fierce, striking and retreating again and again. They didn't have the strength to overpower the Cathari, but they had courage, and they used every trick they knew. When one ship was destroyed, its wreckage became cover for another. When fuel ran out, pilots turned their ships into weapons, ramming the enemy in acts of blazing sacrifice. Even as half their fleet fell, no one surrendered. Humanity fought like a single beating heart, refusing to stop. In the med bay, Zira woke to the sound of distant explosions. Her body was weak, her glow faint, but she could feel the ship trembling around her. The air was filled with shouts, alarms, and the smell of burning metal. Jonas's voice came through the intercom, steady even through the chaos. All units, hold the line. If you can hear me, know this. We're fighting for every life that still believes in freedom. His voice broke slightly before he continued. And Zira, if you can hear me, you're not their prisoner anymore. You're free. Hearing his words, tears filled her eyes. No one had ever said such things to her before. Her people had called her a tool, a burden, a symbol of failure. But this man, this human, had called her free. That word gave her strength. Stumbling out of the med bay, she made her way to the ship's core chamber, where the reactor pulsed with faint blue light. She knew what she had to do. The power her father had placed inside her, the core that had once been meant to control her, was still there. If she could release it fully, she could stop him. But it would cost her everything. Standing before the reactor, she whispered, "Father, I am not your weapon." Her hands began to glow, brighter and brighter until her whole body became a sphere of light. Jonas's voice crackled through the intercom, shouting her name, but she didn't stop. The energy burst outward, spreading across space like a wave of pure fire. The Emperor's massive ship was caught in the blast, torn apart by the same power he had once created to enslave her. The explosion lit up the sky brighter than any sunrise. When the light faded, the Cathari fleet was gone. Silence filled the void. The valiant Dawn drifted among the wreckage, its remaining crew watching in awe and sorrow. Jonas pressed his hand against the window, whispering, "You did it, Zira." He didn't know if she could hear him, but in that moment, he felt her presence in the stars. The war finally ended, leaving behind a silence that felt strange after so much fire and death. The stars that had once burned with battle were now quiet, scattered with the broken remains of ships that would drift forever in the dark. The Cathari Empire had fallen, its great fleets shattered and its emperor destroyed by his own weapon. Humanity had survived, though at a heavy cost. Half the colonies were gone, Earth's defense lines were weak, and many brave souls would never return home. Yet even in the ruins there was hope. The valiant Dawn floated slowly through the wreckage, its engines damaged, but still burning faintly. Inside the ship, the crew worked quietly, patching holes, sending distress calls, and tending to the wounded. Jonas moved from room to room, helping where he could, though his heart was heavy. Every corner of the ship reminded him of Zira, the alien princess who had given everything to save them. He had searched the wreckage for signs of her, but all he found were traces of blue light, faint and fading. It felt like losing a piece of himself. 3 days later, while checking the medbay for survivors, Jonas heard a soft sound from one of the cryopods. He froze. The pod's surface glowed with a faint blue shimmer. When he opened it, he couldn't believe his eyes. Zira lay inside, weak but alive, her skin pale and her glow dim but steady. Her breathing was slow, fragile like a dying flame. For a long moment, he just stood there, unable to speak. Then, with trembling hands, he brushed the hair from her face. "You came back," he whispered. Her eyes fluttered open, and she looked at him with a tired smile. "You said we don't abandon our own," she murmured softly. "So I didn't." Jonas laughed quietly, tears in his eyes. Against all odds, she had survived. The following days passed slowly as she recovered. The crew treated her with respect, no longer seeing her as an enemy or a prisoner, but as one of them, a savior who had ended a war that could have destroyed them all. Word spread quickly across the remaining colonies about what had happened. The humans and the broken Cathari survivors began to talk, not with threats but with hope. For the first time in centuries, there was a chance for peace. New ships were built, not for war but for rebuilding worlds. And in the middle of it all, Jonas and Zira worked side by side. She helped teach humans how to use the safe parts of Cathari technology, while Jonas led repair teams to restore the damaged colonies. Wherever they went, people would whisper stories about the alien princess who fell in love with a human janitor and saved 2 species from destruction. One evening, when the work was done, Jonas and Zira stood together by the viewport, watching the stars. The universe looked endless, full of quiet promise. Zira leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "They gave me to you as punishment," she said softly. "But it doesn't feel like one anymore." Jonas smiled, his arm wrapping around her gently. "That's because they didn't know what love was," he replied. She turned her glowing eyes toward him, and for a moment the war, the pain, the loss, all of it, felt far away. Together, they had faced hatred, survived war, and built something no empire ever could: trust. As the valiant dawn drifted into the horizon, its lights flickering like tiny stars, they watched a new dawn rise over the ruins. Humanity and Cathari would rebuild side by side, learning that even in the darkest corners of space, love could grow stronger than fear. And as Zira closed her eyes, she knew that she had finally found something her empire had never given her: a home written among the stars.